Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Susanna Wong, Senior Manager of the Market Outreach Division at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. On behalf of the Alliance for Green Commercial Banks, I'm very pleased to welcome you all today to join the training session. Green Finance for Low Carbon Technologies, Clean Hydrogen and Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage, jointly organized by the Alliance and Bank of China, Hong Kong. The Alliance is a global initiative that brings together financial institutions, research institutions, and innovative technology providers to develop a green community in emerging markets, to collectively finance the infrastructure and business solutions needed to address climate and environmental risks. The Alliance was launched in November 2020 by IFC and its first regional anchor, the HKMA. The Alliance is supported by the China World Bank Group Partnership Facility and the World Bank Group SDG Partnership Fund. We invite you to visit the Alliance website for more information and register online to receive regular updates about the Alliance activities, including its upcoming events. In this session, we aim to provide the latest overview of clean hydrogen and CCUS, development of related global projects, and the role of banks in supporting such deployment. The event will be recorded and may be shared in the public domain later. Further to the event, you will be asked to complete a participant survey. Your suggestion will be highly valuable for us to plan the future events of the Alliance. To kick off the session, let me pass the stage to Bank of China, Hong Kong. We're glad to have Dr. Han Zhu, General Manager, Economics and Strategic Planning Department, Bank of China, Hong Kong, and Hong Kong Financial Research Institute of Bank of China to deliver opening remarks. The training will be moderated by Dr. Chu Kang, Managing Director of Sustainability Strategy, Deputy General Manager of Strategic Department, Bank of China, Hong Kong.
大家下午好，欢迎您参加金融助力绿色转型聚焦低碳科技创新专业培训及圆桌会议。中银香港作为绿色商业银行联盟的基石成员，很荣幸与香港金管局和国际金融公司一起主办这次论坛。绿色商业银行联盟成立以来，一直致力于可持续金融领域的能力建设、知识传播，旨在聚集商业银行的力量，并且结合科研团队以及企业的资源，共同探讨绿色经济发展战略，探寻传统产业转型之路，为实现净零目标寻找商业化的解决方案。气候危机是我们这个时代面临的巨大挑战。虽然很多国家和地区已经做出了在未来30-40年达到碳中和的承诺，但是全球温室气体排放仍在不断增加，气候危机也进一步加深。要想达成碳中和以及巴黎协定中设定的1.5度全球温控目标，国际社会必须加快行动。今天的专业培训是中银香港主办的系列会议中的第1场，我们将聚焦2项重要的低碳技术：氢能与碳捕集存储利用技术。该2项技术被认为是达成这些目标的关键。氢能可以实现彻底的零碳排放，而对于难以减排的行业 ，CCUS 技术是其实现碳中和的最后手段。在现阶段，这2项技术还未得到大规模的商用，其减排潜力尚未充分发挥。金融行业作为现代经济社会中的重要引擎，如何发挥好其资金导向的作用，为技术创新提供支持，为能源转型增添动力，正是今天我们想要探讨的话题。再次感谢您参与今天的会议，希望接下来各位演讲嘉宾的知识分享能给您带来启发，也让我们一起凝聚智慧与力量，共同应对低碳转型进程中的机遇与挑战。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Dr. Han, for your opening remarks. I'd like to echo again that it's an honor for Bank of China Hong Kong to co-host a training on this topic. Today, we have gathered an amazing group of speakers and trainers. From Bank of China, beside me, we have my colleague, Lori Ying, VP of Sustainability Strategy of the bank. From the energy sector, we have Mr. Li Zhongdan, who is a hydrogen expert at New Energy Division of Sinopec. Sinopec has set the ambition to become the #1 hydrogen company in China. We are very glad to hear from Mr. Li's Sinopec's hydrogen strategy. From Ernst Young China, we have Mr. Lu and Mr. Xiao, who are both partners from Ernst Young's Climate Change and Sustainability Service. Through this service, EY form multi-function teams to help companies understand the risk and the opportunities arising from climate change and sustainability issues. Last but not least, we have Dr. Xi Liang, who are Professor of Sustainable Transition in Construction and Infrastructure and at University College London's Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction. Besides his academic and research responsibility, Dr. Liang is a leading expert in deploying many CCUS projects in China. Dr. Liang is Deputy Director for China's CCUS Committee within the China Society for Environmental Science. He is also Secretary General of UK-China Guangdong CCUS Center. In terms of the flow of today's sharing, we will start with hydrogen. Alex will give us an overview on the technology and the global status, followed by Mr. Li sharing China's application by presenting Sinopec's hydrogen strategy. Moving on to CCUS, Sam from EY will also start with a tech and the industry overview, followed by Professor Liang's presentation on CCUS cases globally and in China. Finally, we have Lori wrap up today's session by sharing some viewpoints from commercial banks' perspectives. The training today will be 15 minutes or so, and hopefully we will have some time for Q&A in the end. We have collected some questions during the registration process, and we can also try to answer some questions coming from the chat. Now, let's welcome Alex.
Thanks a lot for having me, Dr. Chi. Very glad to talk about hydrogen, especially green or low carbon hydrogen today. When the net zero is a global target today, hydrogen has come to the center of the stage, not as a byproduct, as we are familiar with in the past decades, but also as an indispensable energy vector because of its unique features, such as total zero emission, infinite resources, especially from solar PV, wind, and renewables through electrolysis, as well as the high energy density, and etc. Regardless the maturity levels of different technologies, currently both industrial and financial sectors share the common view that hydrogen is at the heart of decarbonization and represents a huge market, opening up and connecting energy, transportation, and other great potentials. According to the Hydrogen Council, ARENA, and EY analysis, by 2050, the sales per annum will be at a US $2.5 trillion level and create over 30 million jobs. China is the biggest hydrogen producer in the world, with an output of around 27 million tons in 2021. Alongside the country's 3060 journey, hydrogen is going to play an important role, and the government has shown its ambition to lead the way. So talks about hydrogen has moved away from why to how. And the answer is obviously intensive investment from today. However, before making any investment decision, What is the status of the maturity level of green hydrogen? And what are the prevailing operation models? How the grants and incentives impact the adoption of the scenarios? And what are the applications that should have a possible business case in the short term? I hope to share some thoughts on these preoccupied questions. To accelerate the development of hydrogen, especially the clean hydrogen, many countries have launched the national strategy and roadmaps to create incentive mechanisms for technology innovation, drive fast cost deduction, and increase competitiveness of hydrogen. And also, very importantly, to promote user cases and applications in large scale. This slide has indicated where the hydrogen markets are accelerated by policies and the supporting mechanisms. For example, by May of this year, countries representing around 65% of the global GDP has launched hydrogen strategies, and other countries are also following. Many of these countries have set up aggressive targets in order to win out in the global hydrogen race. China has launched the Hydrogen Mid to Long-Term Plan 2021 to 2035 this March, in which set up periodic targets and implementation guidance. I believe many of you have read it already. Policy is definitely the first priority to send positive signals to investors and create relatively de-risked environment when green hydrogen is at early stage and with years to become economic viable. To achieve these targets, there is a full hydrogen value chain to be built. As we can see from this slide, from generation, or we can see upstream, whether it is conventional thermochemical processes such as SMR or co-gasification, where we produce the green hydrogen, or through electrolysis process to convert renewables to green hydrogen. We need to meet the fast-growing demand. While the policies push demands from transportation mobility, power generation and storage, as well as heating and industrial feedstock to commercial application and in a large scale. To connect the demand and supply, there must be infrastructure in place, including conditioning and the storage, and transportation, distribution, and refueling, etc. So this is a wide spectrum of value chain, but the core investment story is about CapEx, cash flow, competitiveness, and growth. According to our observation from the market, there were 2 points I want to highlight here. The first one is more than half of the investment at this moment goes to the electrolyzer capacity. The second is that many projects adopt on-site production operation model, which means to deploy electrolyzers right at the end-use plant. This is to improve production efficiency and avoid huge investment on long-distance transportation and distribution. Of course, there are other models such as off-site production and also distributed production as well. Conscious of time, I won't elaborate here. Now, let's talk about the economic feasibility of hydrogen. This is a widely discussed topic, and the key question is when the cost gap between different technologies will be closed. As we all know, currently the green hydrogen or blue hydrogen plus CCUS projects around the world are mostly at early stage and a way to become commercialized. And also all these projects rely heavily on subsidies. Currently, green hydrogen is about 6 times of the cost of green hydrogen. However, many researchers show that the cost deduction is more faster than we thought. As you can see in this chart, some optimistic view is that by 2030, the green hydrogen will be cost competitive with gray hydrogen. All these technologies, they have quite different features, investment levels, and different application scenarios and the participants. So we are not going to see which will win out. Maybe in the end, there are more than one winners. But what we need to bear in mind is the drivers for cost deduction and their moment. The first is I just want to name some. The first is the decreasing renewable energy costs. In the past decades, renewable costs have dropped nearly 70%, and many forecasts show that it will further going down by 50% by 2030. The second is the fast technology development, which press the electrolyzer capex to a more acceptable level. And at the same time, the rising carbon price in many markets, including China, will add additional costs to conventional technologies. Speaking of application and the way to commercial feasibility, we have looked around 34 subsectors in green hydrogen and have seen that 14 of them are currently or close to be commercial. In this slide, we have analyzed the starting point of commercialization of several subsectors in two scenarios. One is, the ambitious case, and the other is the business as usual case. You can see that many applications are carried out in the transportation mobility sector, and that was because many OEMs and investors have been already involved in this field for years. Of course, the new applications in industrial feedstock have also developed in the past years, such as green steel and chemical refineries. What I want to highlight here is the application in the power and heating system. China is now building up the new power system feature with renewables, including distributed renewables. Hydrogen is a real and must-have application to convert renewables into hydrogen, to store and reuse to keep the power generation and the grid balance in order. Heating is another very important application that have not been widely discussed in China yet, but with great potential on blended pipeline transportation and usage. Of course, the market is still waiting for the right regulatory signals such as RAD and etc. Finally, I would like to share some thoughts on the implementation of your hydrogen strategy. The first is definitely to review your supply chain and understand where you are and what are your available sources to build up your business case. The second is to secure public financing with a solid business plan and a feasibility study. The third is about shared economy. When we are talking about large investments in infrastructure projects, and there are many uncertainties, you will need to create a business model to share risks and costs with your partners. Of course, in this process, you will closely work with government agencies, industry associations, and your alliance, for sure. Again, how you can assess the hydrogen value pool, or in other words, your different options, such as project geographies, technology costs, offtake, and so on, in a systematic way, and create a relatively de-risked business model is vital for your way to success. With that, I'd like to pass the topic to Mr. Li from Sinopec to have a closer look at the company's practice. Thank you.
大家下午好， 感谢鲁先生的精彩分享。我是中国石化发展计划部氢能项目室专家李忠丹。
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Liu, for your interesting sharing. I'm Li Zhongdan, the hydrogen expert from the Sinopec's New Energy Division. I'm very glad to be presenting to you all the hydrogen strategy and application of the Sinopec. Hydrogen is considered as the key technique in the reduction of global carbon emissions. In the September of 2020, President Xi Jinping announced China's vision and the goal of promoting carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, demonstrating China's responsibility for adhering the green development and responding to the climate change, and promoting China's green and low carbon transformation. Hydrogen energy has emerged as the best option for the large-scale deep decarbonization in transportation and industry as a secondary energy source with many advantages, as well as an optimal interconnecting media capable of supporting large-scale renewable energy development. Accelerating the high-quality development of the hydrogen energy is important to secure China's energy system and realize the double carbon goal. To this end, the Sinopec has practiced its new energy security strategy for 4 revolutions and 1 cooperation, actively promoting the green and low-carbon transformation of energy. The Sinopec has prioritized hydrogen energy as the first agenda and the core business, and the development goal of building China's first hydrogen power company. The Sinopec has actively promoted the development of the hydrogen energy industry in recent years, taking more solid steps in hydrogen energy production, transformation, storage, and marketing. In terms of hydrogen production, Sinopec is one of China's largest hydrogen producers. In 2021, it generates around 4.45 million tons of hydrogen, accounting for 30.3% of the nation's total production. The Sinopec has also constructed fuel cell hydrogen purification and charging facilities in 9 enterprises, including Yanshan Petrochemical and Tianjin Petrochemical, with a capacity of 19,000 normal cubic meter per hour. In addition, the Sinopec built 3 hydrogen pipelines, including the pipeline from Baling to Changling, with a total length of 100 kilometers. In terms of hydrogen refueling station construction, Sinopec has made great efforts to develop hydrogen transportation business by taking advantages of is networking comprising more than 30,000 gas stations. Sinopec has already built 83 hydrogen refueling stations, including gas hydrogen stations, and has become the company with the largest number of hydrogen refueling stations around the world. In the Beijing Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games, Sinopec hydrogen energy was used to ignite the main torch in the opening ceremony, and 87 tons of hydrogen were refueled to the event vehicles at the 4 hydrogen refueling stations. We have planned to build large-scale industry clusters in our refining and chemical bases, creating an integrated value chain that covers renewable energy power generation, hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, and utilization. In the November of 2021, the Sinopec launched the project of using green power to produce green hydrogen energy of 20,000 tons per year in Kuche, the Xinjiang province. The project aims to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 485,000 tons per year. This demonstrative project is a landmark for the Sinopec to lead the development of hydrogen energy industry and has drawn wide attention in this sector. Under the guidelines of the mid and long-term plan for the development of hydrogen energy industry 2021 to 2035, which was jointly issued by the National Development and Reform Commission and the National Energy Administration, the Sinopec will further enhance the strategic cooperation with enterprises, universities, research institutes, associations, and other units, actively explore hydrogen energy business opportunities, and make efforts to break through key core technologies so as to make greater contribution to establishing modern industry application chain of hydrogen energy and promoting high-quality development of hydrogen energy industry in China. The main business plan is as follows. First, we need to actively set up the framework and value chain for the industry. Under the group strategy of playing a leading role in hydrogen refueling and green hydrogen to reduce carbon emissions, the Sinopec will put more efforts in hydrogen transportation and green hydrogen refining and develop the integration of various steps on the hydrogen value chain. For hydrogen-powered transportation, we are guided by a balanced strategy of following national planning and meeting market demands, actively and steadily developed a hydrogen refueling station network. The Sinopec plans to build its hydrogen refueling capacity to about 120,000 tons per year by 2025. In order to form the network of hydrogen hybrid stations or hydrogen refueling stations and meet consumer demands of hydrogen refueling, fully upgrading and integrating the value chain. As for green hydrogen refining and chemical, based on existing refining and chemical business and co-chemical hydrogen production, we will further expand the scale of hydrogen production and utilization. We will focus on developing green power for generating green hydrogen in regions with rich wind and solar resources, such as in Mongolia and the Ningxia province, aiming to supply hydrogen nationwide with economy of scale. Sinopec will gather its resources in innovation, step up technical research effort, and strive to achieve greater breakthroughs in areas such as catalytic materials for high-performance fuel cell, hydrogen production by PEM, electrolysis, and localization of key equipment for hydrogen refueling stations, and the aim of having more technical independence in the hydrogen value chain. An innovation consortium is formed between key subsidiaries and the University Research Institute, establishing a national innovation platform to focus on building China's own hydrogen technology. At the same time, we take an active part in the formulation of industry standards, promoting technical innovation as well as establishing standards to guide steady development of the industry. Third, strengthening strategic cooperation. In recent years, focusing on the hydrogen energy and fuel cell vehicle industry, we have established strategic investment, joint ventures, and corporations to collaborate with many hydrogen energy industry and academic entities, laying out a solid foundation for developing the technologies, talents, and capitals needed to build a high-quality hydrogen industry chain. At the same time, we will join hands with various government and industry funds, financial institutions, and leading enterprises in the upstream and downstream of the value chain to establish an investment platform for the hydrogen industry, build an industrial investment model, and better support the high-quality development of China's hydrogen industry. That is what I would like to share with you about Sinopec. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Li, for the sharing on hydrogen developments from Sinopec. We certainly learned a lot about hydrogen production and the way hydrogen is produced. Moving to the other end of the spectrum, in addition to simply produce clean energy, we also need to think about how we need to treat unavoidable carbon emissions. And that's where CCUS technology comes into play. And for the next 10 minutes or so, I want to give a brief overview on the technology as well as business overview of CCUS. Firstly, why is CCUS important? CCUS stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. It's important because not only we want to be able to produce clean energy, we also want to be able to do something about the unavoidable carbon. For example, the existing coal plant power stations that's already in place, already planned. We need to do something about the emissions from these emitters. And according to the IEA, by 2040, we will see approximately 40% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions for existing coal-fired plants. And their emissions would still amount to about 6 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. And CCUS is a technology that can be applied to capture and to be able to store the carbon dioxide produced. Momentum for CCUS projects is growing, and with new facilities being planned and underway across the globe. So if we break down the CCUS value chain, basically we can break it down into 4 major parts. First part is capture, followed by transportation, storage, and utilization. At the carbon capture stage, there are different ways you can capture the carbon. It can be captured pre-combustion, post-combustion, or directly from the air. And in addition to capturing the carbon, it also often we need to be able to compress the carbon dioxide being captured in order to provide a better way for transportation. At the transportation stage, there are two major ways to transport the carbon. It could be through pipelines or to shipments across to the destination. It's also worth mentioning that majority of the current pipeline infrastructure is located in the US onshore. And the reason for that is repurposing of existing oil and gas pipelines for CO2 transportation would reduce infrastructure cost and hence provide substantial cost savings for decommissioning, for utilizing such decommissioned pipelines. Looking into the storage part of the CCUS process, there are different storage options available. It can be stored in oil and gas fields, saline formations, or coal seams. It can be stored onshore, offshore. The key point here is that storing carbon dioxide underground is actually adopting the same natural forces that have been around to trap oil and gases in the earth for millions of years. So it's not something that's being artificially created, artificially thought of. It's actually came from the natural forces that's been around for millions of years. Last but not least, we talk about carbon utilization. We often think about enhanced oil recovery, think about fertilization production, which are the most common applications. But there are also emerging areas such as chemicals and petrochemical production, construction materials, food and food ingredients, fuel and energy options now currently emerging. It's worth noting that food and fuel options would actually release CO2 back into the atmosphere. Therefore, should not be considered as long-term sustainable solutions. We want solutions which can trap and keep the carbon from the atmosphere. Hence, polymers production, construction materials, i.e. concrete, might be a better way to store the carbon in these emerging applications. Now, looking forward, if we look at the carbon dioxide capture capacity being forecasted by Global CCS Institute, as well as the IEA, International Energy Agency, we can see that until the 2000s, many of the early CCUS projects focused on industrial applications where CO2 can be captured at a relatively low additional cost. The most prominent case of that is the natural gas processing. Often the CO2 contained in natural gas needs to be separated out prior to liquefaction for LNG production in order to avoid the CO2 freezing and damaging the production facilities. By 2020, we are seeing more applications. About a third of that is not related to natural gas processing. And we are also expecting or being forecasted to have a much larger increase in CCUS capacity in the generation area. By 2030, power generation is expected to account for 44% of the capture capacity. So as you can see in the forecast shown here, we're expecting a large growth in terms of the capacity. And by 2030, we are estimating to have 115 million tons of CO2 capture capacity per year. So if we look at, think about CCUS technology and ultimately how much carbon can we actually store? We need to think about what's the storage potential and whether storage potential is a limiting factor for the technology. And the answer for that is it's not a limiting factor. Looking at what I prepared here, estimates from IEA, a reserve, lower end estimates about total storage capacity, both onshore and offshore, at 8,000 gigatons. And if you look at what I presented earlier, by 2040, we are expecting to have from coal-fired power stations, we're still expecting to have about 6 gigatons per year. And it's thousands of magnitude in scale. So obviously the storage potential is there, and it's not a limiting factor for CCUS technology. However, we want to be able to incentivize more of the CCUS being adopted. And in the next page, I'll be able to explain more on key points on how can we make CCUS more applicable. But in addition to storing the carbon, we also need to think about the utilization applications. And if we can utilize the carbon instead of simply storing it underground, obviously that would have attractive business case for the CCUS technology. So it's not just simply additional cost to store underground, but also byproduct, i.e. the CO2 being captured can actually be used and be used as feedstock for other industrial processes. And a good example of that is in fertilization, fertilizer production. CO2 as a raw material is used in urea manufacturing. And also we are seeing a lot of the CO2 being used, captured CO2 being used for EOR in the oil and gas industry. So those are already common applications that we can see being used, but there are also emerging areas which are promising prospects that we need to consider, mainly in the chemicals and petrochemicals, as well as in the construction materials. So in order to make the CCUS technology scalable, I've outlined 4 points which I think needs to be focused on going forward. First point is that we need to create conditions to stimulate private investments. This means governments, policymakers need to set policy that incentivize the decarbonization technologies such as CCUS. Here, the incentivize, I mean the price on carbon. We are already seeing price of carbon being set in carbon emission trading schemes. We're also seeing carbon taxes being implemented. And that gives the industries an incentive to reduce their carbon footprint and gives incentive to invest in carbon reduction, carbon reducing technologies such as CCUS. The second point is that we need to target industrial hubs with shared CO2 infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, transportation infrastructure can be costly, and if we can do a industrial map to map out the industrial hubs, industrial centers, and utilize existing or retrofitting existing infrastructure or build new infrastructure that dedicated to a majority of these to be used in the majority of these industrial hubs, then obviously there are cost savings, economically viable business cases that can be developed. And thirdly, we need to be able to encourage the development of CO2 storage. By encouragement, I mean we need to be able to understand the technology. As I mentioned earlier, storing CO2 underground is not something unnatural. It's actually a natural process. We need to educate industry. We need to educate the public so that they understand the technology and are aware of such technology and the benefits of such technology in order to encourage CCUS development. And last but not least, we want to be able to boost the technology innovation in this area. We want to be able to continue to conduct the R&D required in order to increase its efficiency, reduce its costs, also to make it more economically viable for vast majority of industries, vast majority of companies to be able to look into the technology and invest in such technology. So Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Liang to give practical cases of CCUS to share his insights on the CCUS being applied in real life in industry.
So thanks, Stan, for making excellent introductions. In this part, I will introduce carbon capture, utilization, and storage case studies. I come from University College London. And globally, as Sam and the earlier speaker mentioned, there have been already more than 20 commercial CCS facilities around the world. And a lot of these facilities are large facilities, many in North America and in Europe. And there are still more in operation and under construction because the carbon price in Europe has stayed at a quite high level, as well as in the UK and in Norway. In the United States, the Form 45Q policy gave very strong financial incentive for building larger scale CCUS projects in the country. So in contrast, the North America and Europe already have a kind of business model to keep large-scale CCS project operational. And this diagram shows why I've been working in the industry up and down in the last 10 years. And from 2010 to 2015, CCUS was actually going down to, and the prospect of the industry wasn't that good. But in the last 2 years, since the majority of countries have committed to carbon neutrality, and more than 85% of global greenhouse gas emission actually related country or region committed to carbon neutrality. So there are a growing amount of commercial CCS facility recently, and we can see the role of CCS will still be given a more important role, in particular like China, where fossil fuel is dominated in the energy system. At the global scale, because the power sector contribute to the largest share of greenhouse gas emission and capturing CO2 from coal-fired power plant and gas-fired power plant priority. So in Canada, the SaskPower have started a carbon capture power plant at a large scale from coal-fired power plant dated back to 2014. And the projects use shell cancel technology with 1 million ton carbon capture and storage, capture CO2 being used for enhanced oil recovery in the very famous Weyburn oil field, and also used to store in saline formation. The project is still operational, and a lot of experience have been shared by the projects to the international community. Coming back to China, and currently there are more than 30 CCUS projects in operation with an annual capacity of carbon capture of about 3 million metric tons by the middle of this year. And more than 20 larger scale projects are under construction, including Hualeng Group invested in 1.5 million ton per annum carbon capture from power plant. And China National Energy Group has already started construction a 500,000 ton carbon capture and storage project in Taizhou. And Sino announced a 10 million ton carbon capture projects in Huizhou, very close to Hong Kong in reality. And also there are growing amount of interest from different firms like Tencent Group. You can't imagine an internet company, IT company started to get involved in CCUS, and they will put more resource in carbon capture and storage. And there are a few basins which is suitable for carbon capture and storage, like in Xinjiang, Shanxi, all those basins, in Xinjiang Zhongguo Basin, and in Bohai Wan Basin, Bohai Bay Basin. So there are many multi-million ton scale carbon capture project has been planned or in construction. So the role of CCUS is growing from earlier pilot stage to now full-scale demonstration. A majority of projects you can see from the pictures are smaller pilot scale projects, but I think the size will grow in the next few years, but incentives still need some time to come. And one of the remarkable projects in China is the Guangdong Carbon Capture Technology Center. If there's no COVID-19, it just took 2-hour drive from border of Hong Kong to the plant, and you are more than welcome to visit. So this project I was involved from 2013, helped to design the project. It's the Carbon Capture Technology Testing Center, which will test multiple carbon capture technology and try to reduce costs for different novel technology. The phase one involved amine carbon capture process, a membrane carbon capture process, which is compatible to multiple technology. And the project is also building, has already built a CO2 conversion to algae, convert CO2 to algae for in the future can be scaled up for commercial purpose. So if you come across any new technology which would be interesting to be pilot or commercialized in China, feel free to use the facility. It's a very open platform. The largest scale CCS project in operation in China is the Shengli oil field project. It's located in the Shandong province. I think earlier last year, the president of China also visited the Shengli oil field and see the CO2 EOR project. So the project captures CO2 from Qilu petrochemical plant, transport by pipeline, and uses CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. So CO2 enhanced oil recovery is a primary driver for large-scale CCUS project in North America since 1970. But given the geological difference, so the scale in China is not very big. But recently, 3 oil companies, Sino, PetroChina, and the Yanchang oil field, they all scale up CO2 EOR. And the project captures CO2 from high concentration sources from the Qilu petrochemical plant. And in China, there's about 200 to 400 million tons of CO2 coming from high concentration sources with CO2 concentration more than 90%. And the capture from those high concentration sources will be, the cost will be much lower. So I believe by the end of 14th five-year plan, a lot of high concentration CO2 will be captured, utilized, or stored. So because their capture cost will only be about 1/3 or 1/4 of a power plant or cement plant. In steel industry, remarkably, Baotou Steel has kick off a 2 million ton CCUS project with phase 1 500,000 ton carbon capture and purification. And the project will use some of the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, but also use some of the CO2 for converting into calcium products as a utilization. So it's very interesting technology, which use steel slag for carbon sequestration. Actually, it's called carbon mineralization. And the project is also related to green finance. People's Bank of China announced the first category to give a concessional interest rate for large-scale bank for developing low-carbon project. And this project is the first CCUS project benefit from the program and financed by China industrial banks. And in cement industry, there's one project in operation, which is the largest cement company. Conch is also listed in Hong Kong. They built a 50,000 tons carbon capture plant in their headquarters, Wuhu, Anhui province, with post-combustion capture technology, and they utilize the CO2 for local market. So this is a few examples of how CCUS case in China has been built up and developed. And we estimate the number of CCUS projects will still be growing. And before China announced the carbon neutrality target, we actually did a study for oil and gas climate initiative to estimate the CCUS growth in different type of projects. And we believe there will be quite rapid growth in the next decades until 2035. And with the current policy environment, I think the estimate here will be more or less conservative. In particular, BECCS and DACCS have recently attracted many interest from Chinese firms. And these two technologies are important carbon removal technologies, and we also have some potential to be pilots. And this is my talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Leong, for presenting these very interesting and important application cases of CCUS. Some of us in the audience might be wondering, how are these large-scale cases funded? Is there a business model for deploying hydrogen and CCUS? And on these questions, I'd like to share some viewpoints from the perspective of a commercial bank. So first of all, in general, I'd say that both of these technologies are still in quite an early stage of commercialization, and therefore, private capital is still quite limited. Currently, most clean hydrogen and CCUS projects are funded in the form of equities by governments, universities, private and state-owned energy companies, and venture capitals. The large oil and gas companies that fund these projects, they do it through balance sheet financing, vertically integrating R&D and supply chain. And at this stage, project finance is still very rarely used in these projects due to its revenue uncertainty and the high financing cost. We also see some PE VC money supporting certain key technologies along the value chain. Although still rare in China, it has become more prevalent in North America and Europe to have equity funding in hydrogen and CCUS R&D. But overall, we do not see much debt financing in these projects, which is usually the expertise of commercial banks. So why has it been so difficult for commercial banks to be involved at this stage? In short, there are two main reasons. First of all, there still lacks a viable business model. As Alex and Sam mentioned earlier, key technology developments are still needed to bring down the cost of clean hydrogen and CCUS. And second, commercial banks have a very different risk appetite from early stage equity investors. As lenders, we have concerns over various risks along the value chain that makes it difficult for us to project return on investment. So what is our view on how commercialization will evolve for these technologies? First of all, I think that governments play a key role in clearing the barriers for private investors. To address the issue of high cost of hydrogen or CCUS, carbon emissions need to have a value. It could be in the form of carbon pricing, carbon taxes, or incentives for companies to capture or storing CO2. And other risks along the value chain need to be addressed as well. For example, to avoid underutilization of hydrogen or CCUS pipeline, governments need to better coordinate the usage of such networks, and sometimes even beyond borders. And to mitigate the risk of CO2 leakage at a storage facility, regulatory frameworks need to be established to clarify storage operators' potential liabilities. Second, we all know that governments alone cannot do it all. Public and private sectors need to collaborate to explore other innovative means to reduce risks for investors. There have been discussions on utilizing offtake scheme or seller financing to fund these projects, partially borrowing from the experience of deployment of renewable energy in the early stage. And as commercial banks, in what ways can we innovate? What types of vehicles can we create to fund green tech development? I don't mean to end on a cliffhanger, but this is a question that provokes lots of thoughts and ideas, and we intend to devote our next roundtable discussion on this topic. Finally, I do like to emphasize that the vision that many of us share is that with governments leading and supporting the hydrogen and CCUS industries at the beginning, the cost reduction will be achieved through a learning curve, and private investors will increasingly fund these projects. Thank you very much. That wraps up today's presentation, and I'd like to pass the stage back to Dr. Chu.
Thank you, Laurie, and all the speakers for your fantastic sharing. What an action-packed session. We have covered quite a lot in today's training, but topic itself is quite expensive, and I'm sure our audience here have a lot of questions. With time constraints in mind, we just take a few. Okay, this is a question, maybe for the two partners from the UI. Could you please share with us briefly your view on hydrogen and CCUS development in Asia Pacific region? Where are some of the opportunities and challenges specific for this part of the world? May I invite Alex to speak first?
Thank you. This is a great question. I think as all we know, Asia Pacific is the fast growing area around the world for hydrogen, first as a production center and also as a consumption center. As we have seen in my presentation, we have shown that Japan, Korea, China, and also Australia are all the major producers and also consumers for hydrogen. So as one of the first movers, for example, Japan, they have very good exploration on the journey. I mean, the hydrogen journey. They have created a lot of the business models that can be applied to other countries and also in the region. And also in China, we can see in the past 12 to 18 months, a lot of the pilot projects are going forward. So and also in very good size, and is also creating more experiences for large applications. So all this are very good trends for this area. But also we should see that on the way, despite the policy support, we can also see the supply chain issues. For example, Japan and Korea, mostly they are the consumption centers, and also China and Australia, there will be the production centers. So when we are looking at this region and thinking about the supply chain within the region, for example, the import and export of hydrogen, we should definitely, to create mechanisms to really promote the business or the interactions between the countries. So what I can see that the Asia Pacific region is great with great potential for hydrogen, both from technology and the business model innovation, and also it represents together, I think, with Europe and Americas, with the leading practice around the world. That's what I can see. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Now, could I invite Sam to share your perspective on CCUS development in Asia Pacific?
Thank you, Dr. Chu. It's a very good question, and obviously, what I presented earlier is about the current situation around the world. I've highlighted a few points which I think are also very much applicable to the APAC region. The first point is that there needs to be clear policies, there needs to be incentives coming from policymakers to make decarbonization front and center, and to have clear price signals for carbon. And we're now seeing a lot of the carbon markets being developed. Different ways of pricing carbon are being implemented, and that will certainly help incentivize the development of CCUS in the APAC region. The second part is, I mentioned the transportation infrastructure is actually a challenge. And if you look across Asia Pac, the way the geography is being displaced around Asia Pac, in particular looking at Southeast Asia, looking at Australia, compared to continents like the US, the European continent, its transportation could be a challenge. However, that can be addressed if we have a more systematic way of identifying the industrial hubs where the most emission intensive parts of the regions are. For example, western part of Australia, parts of Indonesia, looking at Singapore, etc. These hubs can actually be mapped out, and we can design the infrastructure that supports transportation of carbon dioxide, can actually help to minimize the cost required for the infrastructure development. And thirdly, the awareness of the technology, awareness of the public, awareness of industries, educating the industry to understand more about the technology is also a very important part. And it's also very much applicable to the Asia Pac region.
Now we have time to ask one more. I will invite Professor Liang to address this question. Besides demonstration projects by energy companies, what are some of the business models you have observed in CCUS that could have potentials?
Yeah, obviously the main driver in the long term for CCUS will only be two sources. One is the carbon price. If the price of carbon is higher than the abatement cost, if you drive projects taking place, because you will pay more if you don't do CCS, if you build a fossil fuel related power plant, cement plant, steel plant, or petrochemical plant. The second driver will be regulation. So there will be emission performance, including European carbon border adjustment pressure. So then this will also drive the development of CCUS. But prior to these two commercial driver, when we call it has an established mature commercial environment, there will also be opportunity for venture capital to be involved and to put money in for some new technology which can have some significant cost reduction or risk reduction in CCUS. And I can see many financial sector colleagues are still increasingly interested in CCUS from technology point of view.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all speakers for your insightful and informative sharing today. Climate change is likely the biggest challenge we face in our lifetime, and the challenges problem call for innovative solutions. We now have these powerful and innovative technologies like hydrogen and CCUS. And as Alex mentioned earlier, the application of them is not a question of why, but how. Commercial banks might not be the first adopter of climate change, but now we have joined the race to a carbon neutrality. We need to also innovate and seize the opportunities to help develop and commercially deploy these technologies. This topic will be further discussed in our next round of panel discussion on 27th of October. I'd like to close today's training session by thanking everyone for your participation. We invite you all to attend the next session next month. See you next month. Thank you.